Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Spec Marine armour, a bit more heavy graph paper, what? Oh. Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here. Hello and welcome to part 5 of the build of the Warhammer Conquest partwork. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, I'm working my way through the 80-part Hachette partwork magazines, at the end of which we should have two awesome Warhammer 40k armies. Now, keep in mind, as this is a model making channel, that's what I do, I'm going to focus mostly on the building and the painting. I'm not going to be focusing on the gameplay side of this whole project. That's for you to do with your friends in your own time. This is just showing you how to build and paint the two armies. Now, in this episode, I'm going to crack on with issues 11 to 14, which you can see here, in which we get more kick-ass dudes and our first bits of scenery. Okay, so let's have a look at what we get this month. Now, I'm not going to look at the magazines themselves. Some of you have said it's not really that interesting if I spend 10 minutes going through just the magazines. When we're going through and painting, I can't show you everything, so do refer to the pictures in the magazine to see which bits need to be painted which colour. So, first off, in issue 11, which is the first one this month, we have 3 Primaris Aggressors. I never know whether to say Primaris. I'll be honest with you, I don't like the name. It's not a nice word. I don't like it. I have to stop myself saying Primani, partially because nobody outside the UK will get that. But yeah, it's not a pleasant word to say. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. But it's our... So we've got 3 Primaris Bread Cheese Aggressors. As before, they are already available Games Workshop mini kits, but they are moulded in this special plastic for this build series, which isn't the usual Games Workshop grey, which is a little bit soft and easily sandable and shapeable. This seems to be the slightly harder, but not really brittle, more brittle, but it's harder blue plastic, and it's just exquisite in its detail. There's lots and lots of wonderful little things all over these figures. The Gravis armour is a bit more detailed, a bit bulkier than standard Marines, because they are the aggressors. They do seem to be another halfway house between the easy build kits and the traditional Games Workshop minis. The traditional minis have things like separate torsos and all that kind of stuff, so they're completely posable, whereas these guys do seem to have a set pose, but there is some customization ability. And we have 3 little standy stands, all with the hole for their little feety feet. As I said, it is a halfway house, not a full do-it-yourself build. And I think there are some little bits of scenery for these bases as well, because they're more impressive than your standard Marines. These are slightly bigger stands than the standard Marines. So that is issue 11. With issue 12, we return to the chaos side of things, and we have the Foul Blightspawn. Ew! This big, massive, fat Chaos Space Marine has a vat on his back, tank on his back, where he creates all these horrible concoctions of death and disease. And then he fires the horrible disease-ridden liquids through his big, fat gun at the enemy, and they all die and dissolve. It's horrible. Oh, it's gross. Go and read the fluff. It's great fun. Also in this one, we get a stand for him. And we get our first bit of gameplay material. You've got some dice before now, it's not really the first bit, but instead of that crappy little ruler that came on the side of the playing mat, you get a proper flexible ruler now for the measuring of things. And there's not much I can say about that. Next up, in issue 13, we have our first proper full-sized sprue. And I have to tell you, it's not one that seems to be specially moulded for the magazine. This is proper stuff. If you go and buy a scenery kit, this is what you get exactly. So, yes, it's proper scenery. We have the enormous armoured storage crate, which are these big, massive, bulletproof storage crates, is the best way to put it. And we have some barrels, some Promethean barrels, and we have some, weapon or ammo crate kind of things. In this video, I'm not going to show you how to paint this big storage crate. Why? Because I'm going to split this out into its own episode. I'm going to do an advanced technique video on this, because what I'm going to do, in the magazine it has you paint this black and then dry brush it with a grey colour, and it's like, that's really boring, that's really not interesting, because these are all different colours and you can have fun with them. So for this one, I'm going to ignore the magazine and I'll do a separate video where I go to town on this. I'll do the proper pro job. We'll have paint chipping and streaking and staining and weathering and maybe some stripes painted on, and we'll all use all different colours, that ones that you're not going to get with this magazine. We'll use some enamel products and some, you know, oil paint streaks and things like that, and we'll do lots of different techniques. We'll go to town, we'll do a whole episode just painting this to look battered and used. Okay, and last of all, with issue 14, you get no plastic at all, but you do get a lovely dry brush and some more paint. We get a new colour, we get Mechanicus Standard Grey, or as I like to call it, Mechanicus Standard Grey. You have to say it like that. Mechanicus Standard Grey, which is a nice sort of medium to dark grey colour, neutral grey, the colour that is, and this large, lovely dry brush, because what they do is in issue 14, they get you to dry brush. Remember I said that crate? They get you to dry brush it grey after painting it black. Basically, you paint it Abaddon black, and then you dry brush it with that, and that's all you do to it. So if that's really boring, that's why we're not going to do that crate in this episode. But you do get this very nice dry brush, which is for dry brushing, and I will get to show you using that. And now, if you haven't yet bought lots of extra brushes, if you're just getting what you get in the magazine, you should have by now this dry brush and the little crappy brush that came with issue 1. It is a little crappy brush, it's horrible. When it comes to do things like painting crates and big things, you don't want that little crappy brush. I have said before, the brush that you get in issue 1 is terrible. So ideally, what you've already done is thrown that out and gone and bought some decent brushes. Either got some different size brushes from Games Workshop, they are expensive, or you've gone along online and got yourself the Army Painter Mega Brush set, which is a fantastic set of brushes, or something like that. Some of these things are going to get quite big, and painting a big model with a tiny brush is like trying to dig a hole in the garden with a spoon. It's just going to take forever. So have a think. Underneath this video, down below the description, there are some handy links. There's a link to my Amazon store, and there's also lots of individual links for individual products. Do go along and have a look. Think about getting yourself some decent brushes. If you do, use those links down below, because they're affiliate links. I make a little tiny bit of income off those. So if you need to go and buy something and use that link, it doesn't cost you anything extra. You just buy it as normal off Amazon, but I make a little bit of income on that, and you're helping out the channel. So go and have a look. I do recommend the Army Painter brush set. The Games Workshop brushes are actually really good if you look after them. Or just basically any good decent brush set that isn't the one that came with issue 1, because it's terrible. So we have a dry brush and Mechanicus Standard Grey. Start off by taking the nippers, either the ones that came with the magazine or your own, and cut the pieces from the sprue or the tree. You want to leave a little tiny bit of the sprue on the piece. Don't go right up against it unless you've got some very good nippers, otherwise you might risk damaging or stressing the plastic. You want to leave a little tiny bit on here. Next step is to remove these nubs with your nippers. If you've got some expensive classy nippers like my god hands, I can then take it down right against the plastic and nip that off. If you're using some cheaper ones, you may need to actually leave a little tiny bit left just to avoid damaging the plastic. And the reason we do this now and we don't go right to the plastic when it's on the sprue is that it's under tension on the sprue and you can damage the piece. Get it off the sprue first and then trim it down even more. Next, you want to go in with your sharp modelling knife and just smooth that down even more. And what we're doing here is we're not cutting it off all in one go, we're just shaving off a tiny amount each time to get it down to a flat, smooth surface. Lastly, you want to go in with your files or your sanding sticks and just file away any excess, any tiny amount that may remain. Now you may have some discoloration once you've finished and sanded it all to a nice smooth finish, but don't worry about that. As long as it's smooth, it doesn't matter if there's a few sort of white stress marks in the plastic, because it's going to get covered with primer and paint anyway. So just focus on getting it smooth. Okay, and first off we're going to build the Aggressors, and all of these figures, they're all snap fit as they're the easy build ones. You don't actually need to use glue, but I'm going to use a bit. I'm going to use my Tamiya extra thin just to shore up some bits and bobs here. There shouldn't be any seams to fill on these like there were in the Librarian, but we're going to use some glue anyway. So first of all, with the Sergeant, the Aggressor Sergeant, I'll just show you this one. Dead simple build. First of all, you get the head. The head locks in, and it only really has one position. There's not really much posability on these. Each of these three have basically one position for the head, and you snap the chest on like that. Now it is a tight fit, so give it a good squeeze like that. Now this one isn't too bad, but if you find a bit of a gap down here under the armpits, what you can do on the other two, you do get a little bit of a gap. Just run a little bit of your extra thin cement across there, so it just goes in the gap, just like that. Give it a second, get glue on your finger and then try not to actually touch the model with that finger, and then just give it a bit of a squeeze, and that will just squish it together. A little bit of the plasticky gluey goop will squidge out and it will fill that gap a little bit. If it comes out in a big bleb and it's all a sort of bubbly mess, once it's dried after about half an hour, just go in and just sand it very gently with your file and just smooth it down. You won't really see much of that anyway, which is why I'm not too bothered about filling the gap, but if you want to, you can just do it with the extra thin cement. Now, what you need to do is, while this is still wet, you need to get your legs ready. While it's still just together and you've got a bit of glue in there, just dang that leg in. On this one, the peg is on that side, and this little tube fits into that notch on the back of the leg. And then with this leg, exactly the same. It goes in, and that fits into the tube on the back of that leg. Now you don't have to, but again, I'm just going to reinforce these with a little bit of glue. Just touch it to the joint. This is just really just to reinforce it, because I don't like things just being snapped together like this, especially when it's something I'm going to play with on the tabletop. I want it to be fairly rigid. So that is that. Now, what's next? Next, we'll put them on the base. Now, you have to check the instructions for each one, because different ones go on the base in different places. If you want to, there's nothing stopping you. If you want to put him somewhere else on the base rather than in this hole, you can. When you do the base at the very end of this whole project, you'll be putting texture on this base. You can fill those in. You can snip this off, this little peg, and you could just glomp him on there with some glue. But we're going to stick to the holes for now. So on this one, we use the right side hole, and you just quite simply blep him down. Now it's a sort of hexagon shaped peg and a hexagon shaped hole. There's only a few ways it will go, and all you do is get him in there and push him down. Now he's not going to come out of there no matter how hard you try, and the reason I was putting him on here now is, again, because I have glued these legs, I want to wiggle them a little bit to make sure this foot is flat. Real glam rock shoes. And all we're going to do now is, on here I can put a little bit of extra thin on here just to lock him in. Just run it all around his foot. It'll, because it's so thin, it'll whiz under the plastic, melt the stand and the foot together. He'll be welded into place. While he's drying, we'll get the arms sorted out. I do apologise, all that was off camera. I'm so busy working, I forgot where the camera was. These are quite simple. You've got the arm and the front of the arm there, the back of the hand, with the, I assume that's like a little mini flamer. That just simply, or a melter gun, that just simply plops on there like that. And again, I'm going to run some glue. You don't have to. You don't have to glue these at all. The other arm is exactly the same process. You can see the thumb on it there. Exactly the same process. If you line them up properly, unlike me, because I'm a spoon, line up, dear. There we go. Snap it on.
Slap it on.
Touch of the extra thin glue. And on there. And there we go, that's on. Just give it a bit of a squish, squish. There you go. Now, put these arms on the dude. Should be fairly straightforward. Now, on the other two guys, you have a tube that comes off the weapon and round the back, and it connects to the backpack. On this guy, it's the other way around. You have tubes coming off the backpack. Kind of looks like a Mr. Handy from Fallout, doesn't it? Oh, I say, sir, so good to see you, master. Yeah, moving on. What I like to do is not glue this on, but just pop it on temporarily, so it's on there. I can make sure it's all lined up, and it also gives me a good look now, because when I've got this on here, I can see when I get the arms on here, am I going to be able to access everything to paint it? So I can put the arms on very loosely. Once I've put this on, am I going to be able to access everything to paint it? I think I am. I think I'm going to have no problems at all there accessing everything to paint it. I should be alright. So we'll get this arm on. So I'm just going to try and push this on a bit more. There we go. And then that simply goes on there like that. That fixes onto the back of his weapon. There we go. And that now should be the same again. You have to move the arm a bit. This will match up here like that. Now you can see here, it doesn't quite line up properly, not very easily at all. It's a bit off. So all we're going to do is, this is where you might want, or you will want to use some glue. I'm going to get a touch of glue underneath. What I'm going to do is, if I can, somehow, if I can mangle this some way, clamp that down like that. That will hold that in place. I'm going to leave it there, probably for about 10 minutes, and I'll have to do this arm as well, because this arm needs gluing down at the same time. Again, apologies if this is all off shot or out of focus, or my hand's in the way, because it's not easy to do this on camera. I'm just going to push that down so they meet up. Some glue on there, and there we have both of those power fists, power lightning claws, whatever they are now glued in place. Each of these three guys has a little piece of scenery to go on his base. One has a gun, one has a servitor, a dead servitor, and he's got a bit of stone masonry going on there. So all you need to do is just plop that in. Now, I'm not going to glue this in because I might want to take it out later to paint it. So I'm just going to loosely put it in there for now, and I'll probably choose a better angle for it. So you don't need to glue that in just yet. It's not going to come out, but I've not glued any of these in because I might want to pop them out to get them to paint them, or remove them to paint the guy. So I'll put him to one side. Next, we have to build the little green fella. Okay, so now we're doing the Foul Blightspawn. Now this guy only has one actual panel of instructions. We start off with just two halves of the torso. And it's basically, it's the backpack, the middle, and the leg. That's effectively his backpack. So all we need to do is get these two together. Now if you're using the cement that comes with the magazines, you want to put some glue on the inside here first and squidge them together. Because I'm using my extra thin, I can actually put them together first and then get the glue on there. I just run it down the gap, and it will, because it's so thin, via the magic of capillary action, it will suck into that gap and hold it all together. Next we want to put the leg on, and for this I'm going to use the Tamiya normal cement, what I sometimes call the fat or thick cement. It's just regular Tamiya cement, but I've explained before I like to use this stuff where I've got something like a leg or an arm, something that needs some kind of structural integrity. It's a load bearing structure, because the extra thin is a wonderful glue, but it's not sticky at all, not for at least 30 seconds. With this what I call the fat cement, it'll stay on like that. And now it's on there, I can get my extra thin and I can just run that down the gap to go in and do the welding. Next we want to glue on the front half of the chest and body and head and everything, and for this we just place it on the front, and because I'm using the Tamiya extra thin again, I can just put that on there and then run this down the gap like that. He's only got half a head there, and I have to say the first thing that comes to my mind is an old video game for the PlayStation called Medieval. I think it was Sir Fortescue. It was like a skeleton. He didn't have a bottom jaw, just had a top half of his skull. Talking of his face, he has like a breather or a rebreather or whatever you want to call it. Being Nurgle, it's not going to be anything really for his own health. That just slides into the front of the face there. So again, we'll get our extra thin. It's not structural, it doesn't need to hold any weight. So we can just put some glue on there, slide that in, and then give it a very, very careful touch of glue to lock it in. Next we need to add his left arm. Now it's got another sort of just off hexagonal shaped peg there, so it only goes on one way, and that is that way. It goes behind this handle that sticks out of his side, and it needs to line up, the tube needs to line up with that skull there, so it only really goes that way. So just handily, that happened to pop off, but I planned for that. So a touch of the fat Tamiya glue on there, because again it's load bearing, it's an arm. Arms and legs I always like to use the fat glue. Squodge that on there, line up that hose, then go in with the thin in there, and thin in there. Next up we have this funky pipework contraption thing, and that goes from the back of the backpack here and links onto this little circular bit on his waist there, so it just snaps in like that. It's wonderfully mechanical and steampunk. I do like this. So we can use a bit of extra thin here, it should be fine. Bit of extra thin, get that on. Should snick into place. It's not really load bearing, but just sort of snap into place quite nicely and stay in place. I don't need to use extra fat glue on there. Now that's him actually done. There's only one thing left to do, or well, two things. One is to glue him to the base. Now this is a free base, you can put him wherever you want on the base. But you want to put him a bit to the back. And you want to do that because he's not actually alone on this base. He actually has a Nurgling. And I love Nurglings. I think Nurglings are brilliant. They're like little tiny demons. It's got a really one giant eye, a cheesy little grin, and it's butt naked. And you can, I've actually got to paint a butt Baked potato, baked potato. Yeah, it's just, there's a butt on there. So I do love Nurglings. They're so cute and adorable. They're kind of silly and light-hearted. So we need to glue him on, but also give him space to put the Nurgling on there. So when I'm gluing people on bases, I like to use the extra fat glue first. And again, it's not actually extra fat, it's just Tamir cement. So I'll put him on the base where I want him. And he's kind of leaning forward. They do have some strange poses sometimes, but he's kind of leaning forward like that. Apologies, it's off screen. So I get him on there. I push him down a bit. Let the glue stick. And then I can go in with the Tamir extra thin to do more weldy. And like I've explained before, the fat glue, the normal regular glue, that's the sticky. The extra thin just does the welding action. You could just use the normal regular fat glue if you wanted to, but I like to do both. So he's on there, and the reason I've left this big space is so I can put the Nurgling on the front somewhere, but also so I can have enough room to paint both of them, because one will get in the way of the other, I can guarantee that. So what I'll do, I'll find a place to put him, and you can put him wherever you want. So he's kind of walking this way, so I shall have the little Nurgling. I do like Nurglings, and I shall put him there. He's kind of running this way, but he's looking that way. In the same way, he's running that way, but the Nurgling's running that way. It's nice and gives a bit of dynamism if you have things going in different directions. So I do love that little Nurgling. So that's him done. Next up, we can start on the scenery. First of all, let's get the ammo crates built. Done. Next up, we're making the Promethean Barrels, and this is nice and easy. You have two halves, one with the Aquila and one with the skull on it. And all you do is that. Literally, they just go together like that. So I'll get myself some extra thin. I'll just quickly run it down the edges there. Just a little bit. We'll get them together. The reason I did a quick bit of glue there is what I'm going to do is run it along here again. Now it's in place. Be a little bit more generous. I've not pushed it together fully. What we're going to need to do, we're going to need to do something about this gap down the middle. So, now the glue's on there, I can add a few seconds, I can squish that together. The glue, as we've said before, the glue will melt the plastic a little bit. And when you give it a few seconds and then squish it, what the glue does is it squidges out of that gap and bubbles up some of the plastic, giving you a little bead of glue that you can then sand down. It's like a little mini bit of sprue goo, which is effectively what sprue goo is. If you remember in the last episode we did sprue goo. So that should now be enough, once it's dried, for me to sand that back and get rid of this seam line down the middle. Okay, so while those barrels are drying, waiting for sanding, we can crack on with the storage container. Stick some masking tape, or sellotape, whichever you prefer, on the back side, on the outside edges of these. And what you have on here are slots for the feet. This is where the feet go, this is the bottom side. Slots here that tally up with these little tabs. And what you need to do is simply feed the tabs into the slot, like that. So we'll do that on that side as well. Just get the feet in the tabs, or the tabs in the holes, use the right words, get the tape up there. So now you can see we've roughly got that put together. And now that's all together, what we can do is we can go in with our glue without having to hold 17 things with 18 different pairs of hands. So I can run some glue along here. Now don't worry about the glue sticking to the tape. As I've said before, this is a plastic welding cement. It melts polystyrene. It doesn't stick to paper. So I don't have to get on every edge and corner. Just need to make sure I get it around some of the gaps. It will capillary action through those gaps and lock itself in place like that. Next up, while that's still gluing, we just need to put the ends on. We just need to make sure it's all straight. While the glue is still setting, we can wiggle this a little bit, but it's looking fairly straight and even now. And all we need to do now is get the doors on either end. And all I'm going to do is put a little bit of extra thin here in the two hinge sockets, and down on the bottom, and then just plonk the door in. Now you have to be a little bit careful because it does fall all the way through if you get it wrong. It doesn't push in very far, it just quite literally sits like that. Just so there is a gap around the edge, but it doesn't really matter. Once the glue's had a few minutes to set a bit better and you can take all the tape off, time to do the last few steps. First of all, we've got to put these little corner pieces in, and these just go into these two little sort of nicks here in each corner. So get yourself a little touch of the glue, get it in there, and then just drop the piece in. There's two little recesses on the corner there that just correspond to that. So you just need to go around and get all these in. Last couple of touches now, we need to make the bolters that go on the ends of the crate. We've done this one. Dead simple. We've got three pieces. We have this middle piece, which is the frame upon which they go. Put a little bit of glue there, just a touch. And then you've got the left and right side of the bolter. That just goes on top like that. Not complicated. Same on the other side. Bit of glue. Get it on. Now what I would do is I'm not going to glue these in place. I'm going to put them on there like that and just jam them in. They're easily removed. It means that when I come to prime and paint this, they'll keep that hole covered up. It won't get paint in it. And then when I need to store this and transport it, I can take these off to avoid them snapping or breaking. And that's the crate complete. Now there's one last thing we need to do, and that's clean up these barrels. Now you don't need to be too careful here because they are barrels, and barrels are designed to get dirty and battered and filthy. So they don't need to look too beautiful. Now if you remember, we squeezed a little bit of the glue that we glued these together with out of the gap to make a little bit of sprue glue, and sorting that out is dead easy. Get your metal file and just very gently, you can use a sanding stick instead, this is just a little bit faster, very gently I'm going to go over that gap. I'm going to follow the curve and I'm just going to take away that bead of glue. Basically that bead of glue isn't just glue, it's glue and polystyrene that bubbled up from between the two halves, and by sanding it down I'm getting rid of the bead and I'm leaving it with just where that gap has been filled by the plastic. Okay, once I've got that bead of glue removed and it's nice and filed away, I can go with it with a sanding stick, which is going to be finer than the file, but it's still quite rough. This is probably about, I don't know, 120 grit, something like that. I'm just going to go over the bits I've just filed, and the reason I'm doing this is just to try and smooth away any marks left behind by the file, any scratches and scrapes. Whenever you do sanding, you should always work your way up the grit. Start with rough and work your way up, getting finer and finer and finer. Once that's done, we do the same again, work our way up the grit, go with an even finer. This is probably about 100 and, well, this might be about 3,000 grit, 4,000 grit. I'm just going to go in, and quite vigorously this time, because it's a softer, finer grit, so I can go in a bit more vigorously. Remove all the little sanding marks that I put in with that last sanding stick. So again, we're not sanding anything flat now, we're just cleaning up. Everything after the initial filing is just clean up. And there we have it. With that done, that's now nice and smooth. Now it doesn't look anything pretty, it's not the best sanding job in the world, but again, this is a barrel, it's going to be dirty and battered and beaten, so it's absolutely fine. As long as it's smooth and you can't see that gap, like you can see a line there, but it's actually smooth, so once that's primed, you won't see that. So that's what you're looking for. So I'll go and get the others done, then we can crack on with the painting. Yes. Okay, before we get going, let's just quickly double check what we'll need for the next painty section. Obviously we're going to need all the paints we've received so far, so that's Macragge Blue, Lead Belcher, or as I like to call it, Lead Belcher, Retributor Armour, Abaddon Black, Bugman's Glow, Death Guard Green, and we might not use this, I'm not sure, but Mechanicus Standard Grey, or as I like to call it, Mechanicus Standard Grey. Also, we've got our two shades, Agrexer shade and Nuln Oil. You'll also notice these guys aren't bare plastic anymore. That's because I've gone ahead and primed them. Now I have discussed primer in earlier episodes. Basically, in a nutshell, before you put any paint on these models, you want to apply a coat of primer. Primer basically is designed to etch itself onto the plastic or adhere to the plastic or bond to it in some way. And then when you put the paint over that, the paint then grips to the primer. If you just paint on bare plastic, it's less likely to stick to the plastic very well at all, and you'll probably scrape it off just by handling them. So you always want to prime your models. They don't tell you that in the magazine, but you do. Now I've gone ahead and used two of the Citadel Rattle Can primers, Death Guard Green for him and for the crates, and Macragge Blue for these three aggressors. That just saves me then having to go and paint these blue and green. They're already the right colour. You can use any primer you want though, so don't worry if you've got a can of primer and it's not this colour. That's absolutely fine. You'll just have to then go ahead and brush paint him and these Death Guard green and these spinny and these three guys Macragge blue to get them to the right colour. But either way you do it, just make sure you prime. I'm also going to be using my wet palette. Now this is one I've made myself. I do encourage you to make yourself a wet palette. If you don't know what one of these is and you've never seen one before, you don't know how it works, there's a video here. But don't worry, if you haven't got a wet palette, it's fine. You can use a dry palette. You can use a piece of tile or anything you want that's not porous as a palette. I'm just going to be using this wet palette. If you are using a wet palette, here's the best way to use it. First of all, get your paint from the pot and put it onto the wet palette. Now the wet palette needs to be damp, slightly moist, not dripping wet. The idea here is that the wet palette will keep the paint hydrated. You add a little bit of water to your brush and then take the brush to the paint, work from the edge of the paint, not the middle, rotate the brush round, twist it round a little bit, and that'll give you a nice point on your brush, and now you're ready to paint. The first colour we need is Abaddon Black, and on these aggressors we just need to paint some small areas. There's the thin black tubing around the back of the arms here that goes from the weapon into the backpack. You also have the undersuit parts of the armour, that's the sort of the black ribbed bits at the back of the knees, in the crotch area, at the back where the butt is, and also maybe up in the armpit area. There might be a little tiny bit of black if you can get to it. Use the finest brush you've got. Now the trick with Abaddon Black, most of the Citadel paints, you can put it on the wet palette, add a little bit of water to your brush and you're happy to paint. With the Abaddon Black, you might need to add a tiny little bit extra water just to get it flowing. If you need to, give it a go. Abaddon Black can be a bit of a pig sometimes to get it to flow. And when you do paint, work in slow, smooth strokes. Don't stab with the brush, don't go stabby everywhere. You want to work in slow, smooth strokes to get nice, even paint coverage. Last of all, we are going to step away from the magazine for one little area with the Abaddon Black. In the magazine it has you paint the top sort of rear of the weapons in black. We're not going to do that because we're going to use a different method for that later on. So that top half of the weapon near the elbow, don't paint that Abaddon Black, not yet. And that's those black bits painted. So not much to do, just those tubes there and the undersuit areas. There are a couple of small undersuit areas at the top of the arms here as well, so you want to make sure you go in and paint those. Now you may have noticed we didn't paint this part of the gun. Now this is important. It says this in the magazine to paint this bit black. We're not doing that because we're going to use the same technique we did in the last episode, which was to paint this bit lead belcher first, then go in with some normal oil later on. So for the moment, we're going to leave that, and we're going to do that now in the lead belcher part of the painting. So what we're going to do is get the lead belcher ready, and we're going to paint the hoses, the weapons, and all the other bits that need to be lead belcher. Now again in the magazine, it tells you to paint the outside of these Promethean tanks with lead belcher and leave the bit unpainted. You can just go ahead and paint the whole thing. This bit's going to be gold, it doesn't really matter, so you can paint the whole Promethean tank and save yourself a bit of time. So let's get that done now. Obviously we need to start off with the cables, and like I say, this is why we weren't too worried about making a mess with the black paint, because if you've got any splodges of black where it needs to be metallic, you can just go and cover that up now. If you do go over the black with the lead belcher, again, don't panic. Once you're finished, just go back in and touch in the black tubes with your black paint. On the weapons, you want to paint the underside of the barrel. So it's technically this bit here, but not the top bit. But it doesn't matter because you can go ahead and paint this anyway, because this is going to be gold. There are places in the magazine where it gets you to be very neat and tidy, but if you know you're going to be going over with another colour, doesn't really matter, as long as the other colour will cover it up nicely. And Retributor armour will cover up the lead belcher quite nicely. In fact, it'll actually make your Retributor armour look a bit brighter. Also now you can paint this end of the weapon, and like I said before, just go ahead and paint the whole piece of the casing there. It's fine. We're going to go over this with null oil later and make it look dark and black, so you can go ahead and paint this whole little end piece here. Like I said, for the Promethean tanks, just go ahead and paint the whole thing. We are going to go over that with Retributor armour shortly anyway. Okay, so that's all the lead belcher parts done. You can see here, I've done the top of the weapon here, all as lead belcher, and we'll sort that out a bit later with the black casing. The parts on the mask, the face mask, they are quite tricky to get to, so you will get a bit of lead belcher all over the place. Don't panic, just go and touch it in with the Macragge blue afterwards. And around the back it's quite a complicated load of stuff to do. Now the thing to remember, and if you look carefully at this you'll see, the edges between the black piping and the silver sort of hose area, they're not 100% neat and perfect. It doesn't matter. Like I've said before, we're going to be doing a shade later, and as I've said in previous episodes, shades hide a multitude of sins. If there are any little uneven edges between the silver and the black here, don't panic. The shade, when we put it on, the null oil will sort it out nicely. So don't panic if it's not 100% perfect. It will take you quite a while to get all this painted. It's right fiddly, and it takes ages. It took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours, just to go around and get all the lead belcher bits done and all 3 dudes. So don't panic if it's not very neat. Just go in, touch up. If you do get splodges anywhere, touch it in with either the black or the McCrag blue. You'll be fine. Next up, we have my favourite bit, and you know what that is. That's the gold. Yes, we have to do the gold trim. So we're going to get some Retributor armour, and there's quite a few bits to paint on here. So you want to get yourself an arm using the Artificer brush, but you want to get some nice fine work going on. So of course, as always, we have the trim on the pauldrons, and that's these flangey parts here, down to this sort of little lip there, and then all around the bottom as well. You want to get some Retributor armour on there. When you're going around, if you want to, if it's easier, get your brush sideways, kind of angle it like that, and that helps you get a nice straighter edge. We've also got to do on here, we have skulls. There are skulls on the weapons. There's a skull here, so that wants to be gold as well, so carefully work your way around. We also have this sort of reliquary box. Now if in the magazine it shows you painting the box but not the stuff inside, don't worry. If you want to paint the whole thing just to keep things simple, you can do. I'm going to paint the whole box, and then later on we've got other coloured stuff in there. I'll go and pick that out in different colours. We've also got the Aquila. On the other 2 guys, it's just painting the Aquila as normal. On this guy, you've got this cable that goes, this rope that holds this little cross here. There is a cross on the front here, little Maltese cross type thing to paint. We've also got the Aquila. Now the rope itself needs to stay blue for the time being, but don't panic. Just get the thing painted gold, and if you've gone over the rope, just go back in and touch it in with the McCrag blue. Your focus here is getting the gold on the Aquila and the skull. 2 other things you need to paint: the bits on the back of these Promethean tanks. The centre parts need to be gold. Now I did say before, don't worry about keeping these blue. In the magazine it says to keep them blue and just do the lead belcher around the edge, but if you notice, when you paint the gold on top of the lead belcher, it comes out a little brighter. So if you ever want a really, really bright gold, going in with lead belcher first is quite handy, because it's a nice shiny colour and it makes your gold a bit more shiny. So get the centre of these painted in, and last but not least, we want to do the sort of heat shrouding on these weapons, and that's very easy. Just go in and get these painted over, and again, go lightly, don't go heavy, go lightly. Because you've painted the silver underneath, the lead belcher, it should be a nice bright gold. So I'm just going to get all these bits done now on all 3 figures, and then move on to the next step. Okay, and with the gold bits done, you can see these guys are starting to really come to life now. Oh yes. Now again, like we did with the silver, don't worry if the edges of the gold aren't 100% nice and neat and tidy. Maybe you haven't quite got the very edge there on the trim. Doesn't actually matter, because when we do the shades again, it will hide all your sins and it'll make those edges look fantastic. So what's next? Next we have to go in with the shades. Talking of those, and first off we're going to do the null oil on the silver parts. All we're doing with the null oil is quite simply brushing it over all the silver and the black parts. Go over the black parts as well. It'll help cover up any little bits of the black tubing you might have missed, and it'll blend in the black and the silver. Just go, and you need to be careful. Just make sure if it pools up anywhere, you don't want it to pool, because that's when it gets a bit messy when it dries. So if it does pool up anywhere, just move it around with the brush and make sure it's evenly distributed, so it's not sort of hanging around in any one particular spot. Now it's time for an advanced technique while you've got the null oil out. On each of the figures we need to paint the weapon casings on their arm weapons, but on this guy there's also a bolter on the ground, and it's the same principle. The casing on here and the casing on the back of the weapons. This is the bit where the magazine tells you to paint them black. We're going to use the technique I showed you in the last episode, which is to use null oil to build up a black colour that's not quite as dark and stark as black. It looks a bit more like a gun casing. And all we're going to do is we're going to get some null oil, and we're quite simply going to apply it to the area that we want to be black. I'll see if I can do it without getting the brush in the way. Apply it to the bit of the casing that we want to be black, and then just leave that to dry for a minute. Because obviously it's a shade and it's thin, it should sort of stick to the edges of the bit you want to paint black. It'll adhere to the ends, And all you need to do is quite literally do 3 or 4 coats of that. And once you've done 3 or 4 coats, it should build up into a nice black looking casing that doesn't look like you've painted it just flat black. It's got a bit more variation. It may hide away from the edges, so you'll have a bit of a silvery tinge around the edges. And make sure you do the same on these bits of the weapon here, on the arm weapons. Just get some null oil on these as well. They should stay away from this sticky out area, but if they do get covered in the null oil, you can always touch them back in with the lead belcher a bit later. Okay, and you can see the effect here. This is actually about, I think it was 5 coats of null oil to get to that sort of dark metallic black effect. And you can see also on the main sort of weapons here, on the gauntlet weapons, I would call them what they're called, but I can't remember what they're called. I'll put it in a captiony thing. They look a bit more black now, but they don't just look like I've painted them black. They've got that kind of sort of metallic twinge around the edges, which looks pretty cool to me. So what's next? Next is another shade. It's time to go in with the Drax shade. As before, we're just going to apply this liberally, but this is going to be to all the gold areas as opposed to all the silver areas. And this is just to put some shadowing on the gold. Now, I will say, when I personally make things and do gold, I don't use Drax shade. I use a different shade, but we haven't received it yet. It's a shade called Reikland Flesh Shade, which works even better for gold. It gives you a nice warm colour. We haven't received that yet, so we can't use it. And we are following the magazine, so, you know, we're going to do what the magazine tells us to do. But if you have some Reikland Flesh Shade, try that instead. It's a warmer, reddier colour, and it looks a little less dirty and grubby. I'd still use the Drax on the Chaos guys, on the Plague Marines and Death Guard. But on these guys, maybe try some Reikland Flesh Shade. But if you've not got that, don't worry. Let's just use what we've got. Might as well make them all look the same. And with the Drax shade on, for the time being, these guys are now complete. Now, there are lots of other colours to go on these guys. As we get more paints with more magazines, we'll obviously be coming back to these and all the other ones we've painted so far to add more colour. I don't know how far they're going to go. I don't know how advanced we're going to get in the magazines, which is why, like I've said many times, I will be doing some standalone sort of advanced techniques episode, like with Lieutenant Calcius and the shipping crate and some of the bits and bobs as they come along throughout the series. But I don't know how far they're going to take the painting on these figures, but we'll find out. There are more colours to come. Now, if you're worried about the gold as well at this point, by now you've got a few Space Marines and they've all got really dull gold things on their armour because the Drax shade dulls it all down. Don't worry. Some of the techniques I assume they're going to show us later on, and if not, I'll show you anyway. We'll make that gold look nice and bright again, so don't worry too much about that. Anyway, what's next? That's these 3 guys done. Next we need to do the crates. Okay, stand by to be working on these for hours. A very long process. It's not really. First of all, cover the eagle with 2 thin coats of Retributor armour. Lovely, lovely. By the way, when I keep saying Aquila, that's what this is. The double-headed eagle, or the Aquila. Next, you know what to do by now. Slap on the Drax shade. Oh yes. Done. That's it. Just painting the gold Aquila. There you go. Now, I don't know if later on they plan on you painting these a different colour. I haven't really tidied up the Drax shade around the outside edge of the Aquila too much because I don't know if they're expecting us to paint these later on. Again, it's the problem with this magazine partwork. I don't know how far they're going to take you down the painting trail. Personally, I would have given the whole crate an Drax shade to give it some depth, but there's no point doing that if later on we're going to paint them like orange or something. There's no point at all. So I shall leave them as they are. That's where the magazine tells us to leave them. So what's next? Next, we have to crack on with the Foul Blightspawn. Okay, so it's time to get this filthy, dirty fella painted up. Now, apologies, there was a camera fail, and I'd already filmed this bit and started painting it, and the video didn't come out, so I'm going to have to recap quickly. First, we're going to do the Abaddon Black. Now, this figure, when you see the figure painted properly, this part of the incubatum here, this big panel on the back with the cracks in, and this pipe, they're kind of painted in a bluey, greeny, glowy colour, because this is like the tank that contains all this horrible festering pus and disease, and it's like a glowing green liquid, and it's all blues and greens, and it kind of carries on through this tubes here to give this kind of glowing effect. And there's a bit dripping out the end of the gun here, and it's the same colour. Now on this build, they have you paint this Abaddon black. Now I don't know if this is them trying to do their, in inverted commas, priming with black paint, which is not priming, or whether they've got something planned later on. We don't actually get any glowy green colours as far as I'm aware in the 80 issues we're going to get. And just in case you're wondering, I have just posted up a video with a leak, a potential leak of all the stuff we're going to get across the 80 issues, so that's in the playlist now. Do go and check it out. But I'm gonna defer to the magazine for the time being. I'm going to go ahead and paint these Abaddon black. I don't know where it's going to go from that. If it does turn out that they don't get you painting it correctly with all the glowy colours, then what we'll do when the whole project's finished, I'll just strip this down and we'll repaint it. And by the end of the 80 issues, and by the time we've done all these videos in this series, I might actually go back and strip a lot of these down and film some extra how to paint issues. Why not? So we're going to go in with the Abaddon black first. Now there's not many areas to paint here, as you can see, because the camera was being silly. I've done some. We need to do this tube that goes on the back here. Going to need a couple of coats of black anyway. Do avoid the sort of clamps here where it goes into the back of the incubatum, and the clamp where it goes into the back of the bit is holding. That needs to be left because that'll be a different colour. Don't paint the grenade, avoid that. And there is some sort of streaky stripy bits here between this grenade and the tube. That's going to be like greasy, gloopy, glowy liquid later on potentially. So just leave that for the time being. You can paint it black for now if you want, but just make sure to not get it on the grenade. We also have to paint, obviously, the central part of the incubatum window here, the glass. You notice my paint is quite thin. That's fine. It's better to be thin and paint more than one coat than it is to paint multiple coats. And because this will eventually be like a glass part of the incubatum, it's best to go in with a very thin coat now and do 2 or 3 thin coats to build it up to black than do one big fat coat. What else do we have to paint? You have to paint the back, these little ribbed strip on the back of the leg. I didn't know this, I didn't realise this, so I've got to go back and paint this on all my other Plague Marines, and Death Guard Marines. I always call them, is it Plague Marines or Death Guard? I can never get it right, it's one of the two. There's one on each leg. And there is also some undersuit here. There's only one area that I can find, and that's between the leg and the hip in the back here. So just take your time and get that painted. You will splodge some black paint on the green areas, but don't panic if you do that. Just let it dry and go and touch up with the Death Guard green. Don't forget, of course, this isn't bare plastic. I've primed this with the Death Guard green rattle can spray. If you're not rattle canning's primer, and I do recommend you do, but if you have used a different colour primer or you haven't used a primer, you'll need to go and brush Death Guard green over this first before you do this bit. So I'll go and get those done. Hopefully this bit comes out this time, and then we'll move on to the next step. I hate it when the camera doesn't work. It's like, oh, flipping not working camera, middle class suburban nonsense. Oh. And that's the black done. Not a lot of work to do there. You can see here on this bit where I had that liquid between the grenade and the tube, what I did was paint the black in the recesses and leave the raised bits as the Death Guard green, so that when we come to paint a liquid colour on there later on, it'll just be a nice blend. It won't be an obvious straight line between black and whatever the liquid is. But yeah, that bit's done. What's next? Next, again, as always, is my favourite bit, the Retributor armour gold coat. Yes, now there's tons of little bits to do here. You've got all the little bits of trim on his armour, around the pauldrons and on the gloves, on the legs. Just like the other Death Guard guys you've done, just go slowly, take your time. Also on the grenades, you have the top of this grenade here will be gold. I'll just get some paint ready and we'll do those bits. Hang on. Sitting here telling you what to do. Just do it. So yeah, we have the top of the grenade here. This part's going to be gold as well. As are the bits at the base of each grenade, the little sort of strip of metal. The actual haft itself that they're going to hold, the bit that's held, that's going to be silver. And all the trim around the armour that you've seen on the other Death Guard, so just follow those. And on the incubatum here, you've got the trim around the edge. Just carefully get that painted in, and all these little sort of bits that are sticking out, these little widgets and things. And also on the hoses, you've got these bits around here, they're all gold as well. What I would say is go through the magazine on the page. It does kind of show you everything that you need to paint gold. So this is why I say keep the magazines, even though we're doing this build series. Just keep the magazines, go through and see what it suggests that you paint gold. You can, if you want to, just make it up. It's entirely up to you. It's just fun. But it's always a good guide. And for this I'm using my smaller Artificer layer brush, just because it's smaller, gives me a bit more control. And that's all the gold done. As you can see, there is quite a lot of it. It's kind of all over the figure. But just take your time, go slowly. A very fine brush like this is really handy, especially for getting to little bits, say under there on the inside of that leg. It's quite tricky to get to, so just take your time. If you're doing little slips, like you can see a little tiny bit of gold on the green bit of the pauldron there, don't worry about that. Like we said before, when you do the shade on the gold, it'll hide that. If you get a few splubs of paint anywhere else though, like I've got one there on the incubatum, just touch that in with some Death Guard green. I need to go and do that, so I'll do that in a bit. But yeah, any big splobs, just touch it in with Death Guard green. Any minor little wiggles, don't worry, your shade will hide that. What's next? Next is the lead Belcher. And again, we've got quite a few areas to paint here. So we're going to be painting this big springy thing here. I don't quite think it's a spring, but it's lead Belcher. We've got bits all over the figure again, just like the gold. So things like this spring. You've also got inside this dial here. Just take your time with this one. Try and keep the outside of the dial the gold colour. There is a little step here, but I'm going to end up painting that silver now, but we'll go back and paint it with the gold anyway. And there's other bits and bobs. Have a look on the photographs in the magazine. There's obviously this arm here that goes all the way around the side. That needs to be painted in lead Belcher as well. And the hafts of the grenades, the handle bits, very carefully work your way around. Try not to get too much of the paint on the nurgling. If you do get any anywhere, like I said, just go and touch it in with some Death Guard green. So I'll go and work my way around now, and when we come back, it's shade time. Oh yes. Once you've painted all the lead Belcher, it's time to go in with the shades. Yay, it's shade time again. And with only 2 shades in our arsenal, you know how this works. First of all, you're going to go in with the Aggressors shade and paint all the gold details. As before, be quite generous, don't be afraid to slap it all over, but just make sure it doesn't pool up anywhere. And if it does, just move it around with your brush to avoid getting any big dark patches. Once the Aggressors shade is dried, you need to go in with, you guessed it, the Null Oil on all the silver areas. Again, be generous, just make sure it doesn't pool up anywhere, but don't be afraid to get stuck in. And with that done, there's just one step left, and that's to paint the pinky bits. So we need to paint the nurgling, we need to paint where the tentacles are coming out of the armour, so the bit on the chest here and under the side and some others. There's this sort of bit here, which is a little tiny tentacle. Also some of the heads, so this head and this grenade, not that grenade apparently, I'm guessing that's going to be bone, and that head there that's hanging off his waist, and any other tentacles you can find. I'm also going to paint this tube here, even though it doesn't say to, I'm going to paint that. And all we need to do is go in with the Bugman's Glow. So as always, just go in carefully, thin your paint a little bit with the water, and if it comes out a little bit watery or it doesn't give you good coverage, if the paint's a bit sort of transparent at first, don't worry too much, just let that coat dry, go in and do a second coat. It's always better to do more than one thin coat than one single very thick coat. And with the Bugman's Glow painted on, that's issues 11 to 14 done and finished. Now we haven't obviously painted the shipping container, the big steel armoured container. That's going to be a separate episode, like I explained, where I show you lots of fun advanced painting and weathering techniques well beyond what they show you in the magazines, so keep your eye open for that. Now there was one other thing I wanted to mention, which you may have picked up on over the last few episodes. As I'm painting these, especially on the Chaos guys, you may notice that I skip some parts, and what I mean by that is I don't do exactly what it said in the magazine. For example, in the magazine, the feet of this nurgling are nice and neatly painted. The base is green, the feet are pink. The skulls aren't just completely painted in Bugman's Glow. There are some green bits on the skull if you look carefully in the magazine and refer to the photographs. The reason they've done that is because those are bits that are going to be painted later on, but they're assuming you're going to play this on the tabletop when you finish painting to this point. So they want it to look nice and neat. However, for example, the skulls on the back where they paint it the Bugman's Glow but leave green bits, those green bits are going to be bone later on. Now, knowing they're going to be bone later on, I could just paint the whole thing Bugman's Glow, because I know later on I can cover over that with the bone colours. So don't worry too much if you're not getting it exactly like it shows in the magazine. For most of this, where you've got, say, a skull or something, or a head or anything like that, where you know there's going to be another colour to come, we just haven't got those paints yet, you don't have to worry about being neat and tidy. You can just go ahead and, in case of these heads, just paint the whole head, and then you can touch in the bone and other stuff later on. It's fine. But with that, that's everything for this episode. That's issues 11 to 14 done. Still to come, we've got to do Lieutenant Calcium, as I like to call him. We've got to do that shipping crate, and there's some other bits and bobs. We've got the next 4 issues, and I've also received the first War Gear pack, the Premium War Gear pack. If you're a premium subscriber, you know you'll get one of these big packs of extra stuff. Now, it's all gameplay oriented, but I don't know what's in it, so I'll be filming a little unboxing of that as well. So do stay tuned for more of this Warhammer Conquest content. In the meantime, thank you again for watching. Don't forget, if you want to help support this channel and keep this channel going, you can do. Just make sure to follow the channel, subscribe, and like every video. If you see an advert on the video, make sure the whole advert plays through. It helps me out a great deal. And if you'd like to really help, visit me on patreon.com, address here. patreon.com/modelmakingguru. You can help me out each month, and it keeps the lights on, keeps this channel going. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Go get painting your minis. I hope you're having fun. We've only got another 1.5 years to go, so happy times. And oh, and don't forget as well, the video on my channel that shows what might be coming for the rest of the 80 issues. Go and have a look. There's a lot of stuff coming up, a lot of good things we're going to have fun painting. But until next time, adios amoebas.